The chain that spoke. The bus moaned through the forest like an animal too tired to die. Its headlights stretched thin across the trees, slicing fog that refused to move. The October sky above Bohemia hung dull and heavy, the color of lead pressed by years of smoke. Every time the wheels hit a pothole, the ceiling clicked like bone against bone. Metal ticks, faint engine hum. No one spoke. A few tourists slept, their heads bobbing in rhythm with the bumps. The driver muttered into static, adjusting the radio, but all I caught was a voice half buried in snow. Something like a sigh dragging through gravel. I told myself it was the signal, just the signal. I stared out the window. Pines slid by like slow-motion spears, their tips shivering against the gray. Once, I thought I saw a movement, a shimmer deeper in the forest, something thin catching light, like a chain lifting itself an inch before the trees swallowed it again. Breath shifts. The bus swayed. Someone coughed. The air smelled faintly of oil and pine sap, that old forest smell trying to remind you it existed long before you. When the bus finally stopped, the sound died too quickly, like an animal cut off mid-breath. The forest opened, but not wide, just enough for the castle. Houska stood there, hunched against the hill. It didn't look built, it looked found. A carcass polished and propped up for tourists, its windows blank and glassy like taxidermy eyes. Wind moved through its turrets without howling. Even the air seemed careful here. Behind the ticket booth, a table displayed cartoon magnets, little black holes spitting fire, Gate to Hell, Bohemia, in cheerful red letters. The printer ink smell mixed with grilled sausage from a nearby stand. Hell had a food court now. The guide was young, straw-blonde hair, neat beige coat, a smile rehearsed too many times. Hell is open from 10 to 5, she announced, voice bright but trembling at the edges. If you want the dungeon tour, please register in advance. I nodded, notebook under my arm, pretending to be amused. Another gate to hell. I'd seen dozens, all myths sold in different fonts. But when I stepped through the chapel door, the air hit different. Not musty, not cold. Something else, thick, metallic, and alive. Moisture seeped up from the flagstones. My steps echoed as if the stones were hollow beneath, as if something huge waited just an inch below. The plaster walls peeled in long curls. Fragments of fresco clung like scabs. A headless angel still floated over the arch, its paint flaking like dandruff from a corpse. And then the smell. Not earth, not mold. Wet hide left too long in heat, cut with the sweetness of rusted iron. It smelled like blood that had learned patience. In the center of the chapel, a glass circle was set into the floor, rimmed in iron. Thick, black, cold. Tourists leaned over it, laughing, phones blinking. Beneath the glass, nothing, or maybe the kind of dark that waits for something to fall into it. Beside it, a wooden case displayed relics. A brick split in two, a brown page under plastic, and a chain, short, rusted, coiled like a dead snake. The placard read, "Chain fragment recovered from the pit." I skimmed automatically. I had mockery preloaded in my head. Then I saw it. Not just rust. One of the links held something darker, uneven, the color of dried scab. My fingers moved before my brain caught up. Heartbeat rises. "Please don't touch the exhibits," the guide said gently. She smiled like someone offering a hand to a drowning man while keeping her distance. "Just looking," I replied, but my voice didn't sound like mine. My fingertip brushed metal. It wasn't cold. It pulsed, faint but steady, like the echo of a pulse buried under iron. I pulled back on reflex, but a tiny burr caught my skin. No pain, just a soft click, like a lock closing from the inside. A bead of blood surfaced. It felt hot. I blinked, and for a second, I thought I saw the link tremble. From the glass circle, air rose, a slow exhale from below. Low hollow breath. No vents. No draft. Still, something was breathing. Someone behind me joked, "Hell's breath." The guide laughed politely, but her eyes didn't follow. The smell thickened, sweet, rotten. The light flickered once, yellow turning briefly to white-blue, like lightning behind walls. She began the legend's speech, voice slightly faster now. The prisoners lowered into the pit, their hair whitening in a night, their minds unstitched. I'd read it before, but I hadn't heard it with the smell still in my nose and the chain still vibrating against my fingerprints. I bent again toward the glass. The child near me pressed its face to the surface and shouted, "I don't see anything." Its laughter shattered on the glass like pebbles on water. That was when I heard it. Not the tourists, not the guide, not a machine. A sound rising from below, thin, tensioned, like a wire plucked once and left ringing. My spine stiffened. I could feel it in my bones more than my ears. Then, clear as whisper, "Down, one more step." I froze. The voice was behind the glass, but it didn't echo. It sank. Nobody else reacted. The guide pointed at the fresco again. The mother tugged the child towards souvenirs. Only the chain link gleamed now, faintly wet. I stepped back. My blood was gone. No red, no mark. The skin felt colder, like metal learning skin's temperature. Then came the sound again, rhythmic this time. Tick, tick, tick. At first, I thought footsteps. Then I realized, heartbeat. My heartbeat. I tried to laugh at myself. It came out dry, brittle. I turned to leave, but the chapel floor shifted, just enough to make balance uncertain. The glass pane fogged, not from breath, but from underneath. Mist, thin as size, pressed against it. And then a face formed below. White, stretched, blurred by pressure. Eyes wide, no pupils. Lips moving behind the glass, soundless. Too late, it mouthed. Every atom in me recoiled. The lights flickered again. My throat tried to scream. Only air came, thin and useless. Wind rose, not from the windows, but from the pit. Cold upward. The chapel trembled then, blackout. I opened my eyes to the smell of horse sweat and iron. My wrists ached. Bound. The chain bit in, wet and old. Above me, no ceiling, just a sky the color of clay before firing. Men in armor surrounded a hole in the ground. A priest murmured a prayer with two voices, his and something else layered beneath, high and childish, repeating every word wrong. Echoes overlap. I couldn't breathe right. The words didn't translate, but they meant judgment. My name was called, wrong, older. It landed in my chest like a lock snapping shut. "I'm not him," I said. The air ate the words. The priest's eyes were hollow with sleeplessness, but not mercy. He nodded once. Guards moved in. The chain on my wrists tightened, each link glowing briefly red like breath under skin. They lifted me toward the pit. The smell rose first, rot, damp stone, and something alive waiting below. The air came from under the world, not over it. The priest raised the cross. The shadow bent the wrong way. Then, a voice beneath the ground finished his prayer for him, and laughed. They pushed me, falling. No air, no gravity, no scream. Just the sensation of skin peeling backward as space forgot what direction was. Something soft caught me halfway down. Warm, slick, alive. It held me like a hand might hold breath. Finally home, it whispered inside my head. I tried to move. Couldn't. Something slid across my chest, thin, wet, tracing my ribs like fingers learning Braille. Then came the tightening. The chain. It didn't wrap me. It grew from me, link by link, rising through muscle like veins replacing themselves. I looked up, or thought I did. Far above, a faint circle of gold. The chapel glass. Tourists peering down, their faces warped by light. The guide smiled. The child laughed. None of them saw me. I raised my hand toward the glass. But the chain yanked back. Pain burned like molten wire. The pain vibrated, and my reflection stared up at me, wide-eyed, lips moving. "I'm here," I tried to say. No voice. Only a hiss in my lungs. Then the voice, the one now inside me, spoke again, clearer. "Don't be afraid. You are me." A violent jerk. I gasped awake. The chapel again. The same lights, the same tourists. The same smell of printer ink and grilled food bleeding in from outside. The chain in the case lay still. The guide finished her story about the prisoners. Everyone clapped lightly. I stood there, breathing too fast. My sleeves itched. I pulled them back. The skin around my wrist was marked. Thin, dark grooves, like a seal pressed just beneath the veins. Not bleeding, just there. Something in my chest pulsed once, slow and deliberate. It felt older than a heartbeat. A voice, faint, close enough to fog the inside of my skull. "You call me with blood." I only answered. I turned toward the door. My vision swayed. The room tilted sideways for a second, or maybe I did. I stepped into the hall. The air was lighter, almost kind. I thought I'd escaped. Then behind me, faint but unmistakable, metal scraping stone. One link, one pull. Darkness closed like eyelids. The hole they built to bury fear. I came back to breath like a diver breaking water, but there was no water and no surface, just a pulse thick as tar pushing through my ribs. My mouth opened on instinct. What came in wasn't air. It was a texture, warm and granular, like breath that had already passed through lungs that weren't mine. Each inhale carried voices faint as dust, people praying, people choking, people pretending the two were the same. My eyes adjusted slower than my thoughts. Darkness had color here, a violet bruise where stone should have been black. Threads of gold veins ran through the walls like someone had tried to stitch the earth shut. The chain around my wrists no longer hurt. It pulsed with me, calm, rhythmic, obedient. When I tried to pull away, it didn't resist. It waited, like a pet that had learned the trick of patience. I stood, or thought I did. My legs remembered motion before my body did. The ground beneath was soft, yielding, not soil but something made of thousands of crushed things, shells, bones, teeth, maybe centuries of prayers kneaded into pulp. The smell carried iron and honey and rot in perfect balance. I listened. There was no wind. The only movement was breath, and even that didn't seem to belong to me alone. When I exhaled, the walls contracted, as if the pit itself shared lungs with me. Something glowed faintly ahead, a pulse in the rock like the ember of a forge waiting to be stoked. I moved toward it, each step sinking half an inch. My footprints filled back up immediately, as if the ground refused to record me. The ember brightened into a doorway, not carved, formed. A vertical slit in the rock, its edges trembling with wet light. Beyond it, I could make out a faint echo of chanting. Low, rhythmic, circular. It had no melody, just the repetition of a single idea trying to convince itself it was holy. When I stepped through, the world widened. The pit opened into a chamber vast enough to drown a cathedral. Arches of black stone rose and met at impossible angles, ribbed with chains thicker than men's torsos. Between the links, shapes moved, slow, deliberate, faceless, wearing the suggestion of bodies like borrowed clothes. They carried nothing. They built nothing. They simply turned, in perfect rhythm, around a central void that swallowed light and returned it in fragments. They didn't see me, or maybe seeing wasn't the point. I thought of the villagers, the king, the priest. What if they hadn't thrown men into hell to destroy them, but to feed this thing, to give it continuity? I remembered a phrase from the priest's voice before the push. If he lives, the devil is truly below. Perhaps living was the sentence. A shadow detached from the turning figures. It had no face, but its absence of one seemed deliberate. It stopped before me. Its shape was human enough for conversation. Why? I asked before realizing no sound left my lips. The question rose from bone instead of mouth. The shadow tilted its head, a mimic of human curiosity. They built this to bury what frightened them, it said. Its voice was neither male nor female, but familiar, like hearing your own whisper from another room. Fear dug the hole. Guilt filled it. Then what are you? The echo that keeps it from closing. Behind it, chains groaned, not as metal, but as old thoughts being remembered. The motion of the faceless continued, endless orbit, worship without purpose. The shadow lifted its arm. 1,000 threads of rust fell like dust. Every link once belonged to someone who refused to confess. The more they hid, the stronger the chain grew. You felt it above, didn't you? It remembers fingers better than names. I looked at my wrists. The metal had sunk beneath skin now, leaving faint outlines that pulsed faintly gold, like veins filled with light instead of blood. I'm not one of them. Of course not, it replied gently. You're newer metal. The whisper of the orbiting shapes shifted key. One by one they began to hum, and the pitch aligned into something dangerously close to harmony. The void at the center vibrated. I could feel the hum in my teeth. The shadow stepped aside. You came here thinking you were thrown. But the pit doesn't take what it isn't called to. You followed the sound. You answered. I wanted to deny it, but memory leaked through. The bus, the souvenir stand, the magnet-stamped gate to hell, the guide's hand shaking as she said the hours of operation. And the chain, the link that pulsed when I touched it, the way it seemed to know my blood before I did. I don't belong here, I whispered. Neither did the first builders, it said. Yet they could not stop digging. They told themselves the hole would trap evil. But what they buried was the part of themselves that trembled when they prayed. The chamber flickered. The figures dissolved into silhouettes of other times. Monks with shovels, masons stacking stones, soldiers driving stakes, peasants crossing themselves. Each swing of a tool left not dust, but light. The more they built, the darker the hole became, until their own silhouettes were absorbed by it. I felt dizzy. How long has it been? The shadow looked up toward the unseen ceiling. How long since you first feared silence? The question cracked something in me. Suddenly, light, dim, gray, trembling, flashed from above, and for a heartbeat I saw the chapel's glass circle far away, warped by distance and time. Tourists leaned over it, phones in hand. I was beneath them again. I raised my arms. The glass blurred, their faces smeared by the distortion of centuries. They were looking straight down, but none of them could see me. Only the child pointed, mouth forming an O of delight. The shadow beside me smiled without mouth or eyes. Every generation peers down and thinks they're safe because they're looking, not falling. The image flickered out. The hum returned. The void in the center of the chamber had changed. It now glowed faintly red, pulsing like an enormous pupil. Inside that glow, I thought I saw the suggestion of a face, many faces overlapping, merging, dividing. It was all of them. The king, the priest, the old woman, the blacksmith, the boy, and underneath, my own. What is that? The hole remembering who dug it. Can it stop? Only if fear forgets itself. And it never does. The walls breathed again. My pulse matched the rhythm without permission. The air thickened until it carried weight. Every exhale left condensation that spelled brief words before dissolving. Names, confessions, fragments of prayers. I stepped closer to the edge of the central void. Heat radiated from it like from a forge, but it wasn't warmth. It was curiosity, a living interest. The chain at my wrist trembled once. I felt it in my spine. The shadow moved behind me. You'll learn the pattern soon. They all do. Build, bury, forget, build again. The hum of the others swelled. The chains above tightened, some snapping loose, some melting into each other. Sparks rained upward, not down. The ceiling, if it existed, glimmered like the underside of a frozen lake. I felt the pull then. The same downward gravity that wasn't gravity. The same hunger that had waited at the lip of the pit. Only now it was internal. The voice that had spoken inside my chest during the fall began again. Clearer, older, patient. You are the witness and the wait. You will keep the door closed until someone else calls. The shadow placed something in my palm. A single link, dull and slick. My reflection trembled inside it, thinner than paper. What happens if I refuse? It didn't answer. Instead, the ground shifted. The figures began to kneel, not in worship but in synchronization, as if following a tide. The void pulsed brighter. The air turned white. When I looked again, the shadow was gone. The chamber was empty. Only the hum remained, now lodged behind my eardrums, steady as a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I was standing alone at the edge. I should have been afraid. Instead, something like clarity slid into me, slow, liquid, and irreversible. Maybe the villagers were right. Maybe the only way to prove hell exists is to send a piece of yourself there and listen for the echo. The thought didn't feel borrowed. It felt remembered. I knelt and held the chain link up to the void. Its color deepened until it matched the red glow beneath. My wrist scars burned. I pressed the link against them. It melted in, seamless. The hum stopped. Silence expanded outward like breath finally exhaled after centuries. For a moment, I thought the pit had closed. Then the ground below me cracked, narrow but infinite, and light spilled through. Not holy light, something older, the kind of glow that lives under fingernails after working with fire too long. Out of that light, a hand reached up, bone, soot, vein, and took my wrist gently. Now you understand, it said without speaking. The hole was never punishment. It was memory refusing to rot. I wanted to pull back, but the fingers tightened. Not cruel, not kind, just final. My vision folded in half. The chamber dissolved. I was back in the narrow throat of the pit, suspended, half-formed, half-erased. The walls shimmered with moving shapes. The same soldiers, the same king, the same century repeating like a scratched record. Each rotation pressed me thinner until I wasn't falling anymore. I was part of the descent itself, stretched along the surface of time. From somewhere above, I heard the sound of shovels. Newer, sharper, modern. A voice in a hard hat shouted in Czech. Another answered in English. The years were peeling forward again. Excavation. Someone was digging the pit open. I reached upward through the centuries, through stone and bone, through history's damp pages, until my hand brushed something warm. Glass. Smooth. Circular. The chapel floor. On the other side, tourists bent over, snapping photos. Their light pierced down like needles. A child's laugh bounced off the glass. My palm left a faint mark, condensation shaped like a human handprint. The guide frowned at it and wiped it away. She straightened. The tourists drifted toward the exit. The chapel returned to quiet. Under the glass, my breath fogged again, spelling a single sentence before fading. The door remembers its builders. And then, the chain moved once, a lazy motion. Less a threat, more a reminder that something still lived down there, polishing the fear people left behind so it would shine enough to be found again. Above, the sun went behind a cloud. Below, the light did not change. Time exhaled, slow in content. The hole stayed open, waiting for the next confession. The church's seal. I did not know how long I had been falling, only that the fall had stopped behaving like a fall. There was no ground, no ceiling, only the sense of being clenched inside a throat that could neither swallow nor spit me out. Gravity forgot me, air forgot itself, and time began measuring not in seconds, but in mildew growing on the inside of my lungs. The taste of iron came and stayed, patient as a teacher. My wrists learned the pulse of their chains, and the chains learned it back. Open eyes were black, closed eyes were the same black imprinted backward, the world reduced to a negative photograph that refused to fade. I tried to speak, but my voice broke in half and came back as children's laughter, faint at first, then spreading like a rumor through stone. Those invisible children who always find a way to giggle when pain happens to someone else. Death should have been the next room, but death at least has a door, and I was suspended in a hallway that only knew how to continue. I dangled like a straw doll nailed beneath a roof beam to keep the sparrows away, trembling whenever the pit exhaled. A note of iron rolled downward, verdict disguised as sound. My ribs rang with it, and for a moment I believed the bell was inside me. Then light arrived. Not warmth, not grace, but an arterial filament that trembled as though the vein that carried it had been cut. Above me, hands held candles too small for faith. Robes pressed together in a ring of soot. Incense trailed off in gray flags that dissolved before they reached my face. Someone had driven an iron cross into the soil at the rim. Its shadow divided me down the center like a blade preparing to brand. They had not come to rescue, but to fix me in place, to turn motion into permanence, to make the pit part of the world and me part of the pit. Their prayers started out of tune, stumbled twice, then found the rhythm of authority. Kyrie eleison, Christ eleison. The syllables slid down the stone and struck my skin like salt poured on an old wound. My mouth opened automatically. The crack across my lips answered the ritual with blood. The oldest priest steadied himself against the cross. His beard was a rope of silver, his eyes cataract glass, two blind moons pretending to watch. He spoke the way masons lay foundation blocks. In nomine patris et filii et spiritus sancti. The echo that rose from below was wrong, thinner than breath, an imitation of language stripped of vowels. In, no, me, in, then giggling again. The sound of my own screams repeating themselves until they forgot what they meant. A younger priest whispered, "Father, is he still alive?" And the elder, without turning his cloudy eyes, said, "Not a man. Not anymore." Oil came next, thick and copper-scented. The first drop landed on my forehead and burned with the honesty of poverty, the way cheap meat burns in a pan that will not forgive it. It wasn't pain, it was recognition. Something ancient was identifying me by scent. The villagers relaxed at my convulsion. A collective breath of relief. Proof that evil hurts when touched by faith. Someone's rosary clicked like teeth. Another voice shouted, "Lord, lock the door." A third struck his brow against the ground to underline the line. My own prayer. "I am not what you think. I was thrown. I am innocent," shredded in my throat and braided itself with the others until we were all one rope of noise tugging at the same heaven. Then the hammers began. One strike, another, punctuation on parchment made of bone. Cock, cock, cock. The rhythm turned into language before anyone realized. They built the way frightened men always build. Fast, loud, needing structure to drown the echo of their fear. Each lift of stone pressed my ribs flatter. The lime hissed like repentance. The sand sighed. The water remembered its river and forgave them once, never again. Under that rhythm another sound crept in. The patter of tiny unseen claws keeping the grave's own time. They set a table and taught it to be an altar. I could feel the geometry descend. Cloth, candles, a relic folded into wax the color of spoiled butter. The young priest read words meant to make the air behave, but his voice trembled toward the chain around my wrist. If it is not a man, he asked, what does it mean that it once was? The elder stared downward, his face a landscape of fatigue. It means God will have his door, he said, and after a moment, it means we will be the hinge. The younger swallowed his hunger, asked, and the price? That we are the hinge, came the reply, flat as lead cooling. Night did not fall, it congealed. The air thickened into brick. A bluish light seeped upward, forgiving nothing. From it assembled silhouettes that used to be human, bodies rearranged by wrong faith. A torso with a dog's mouth mouthed scripture with a monk's rhythm. A child's eyes grew inward. A woman's face bled upward through her throat. They climbed in near silence, as if obeying liturgy. When the chapel bell answered the wind, they withdrew, not gone, merely recessed behind the wall like a choir behind a veil. By day the masons worked. By night something deeper finished the job. Mortar hissed, lead cooled, fear hardened into stone, and stone once blessed refused to remember its sin. Villagers whispered their contracts into the foundation. Take him, leave us. If he lives, fell the old tree. If he dies, leave the roots. Each bargain added another inch of wall, another ounce of certainty. When the final hammer quieted, the elder priest pressed both hands to the cross. We have closed the door, he said. The younger's voice cracked. At what cost? The answer came slow enough for silence to learn its shape. Not demon, not man, something that once was man. He took off his ring, held it like a small obedience, put it back on because symbols only work when worn. May God forgive us our structures. Then came the seal itself. Lead sheets, wax, the lion's tail stamped twice, heat pressing into iron, iron into stone, stone into memory, and my pulse nailed beneath it all. When the last footstep left, the chapel exhaled like a body after confession. Candles sighed out. Warmth leaked upward and disappeared. The chain tightened gently, adjusting itself to my new function. The voice returned, close to the bone behind my ear. You are not demon. You are no longer man. I waited for the third line, and it came as naturally as breath. You are the door. The chain found its notches. Cold burned, heat froze. I screamed the way metal sings inside a furnace that has forgotten how to cool, and held the note because holding something, anything, meant I still existed. When silence came back it fit perfectly, a glove of absence. I took inventory, wrists engraved with iron alphabets, ankles learning the grammar of stone, a tongue fluent only in salt, eyes so practiced in black that daylight would seem obscene, a chest that no longer rose because breathing had been delegated to the architecture. My name was missing, not lost but reassigned. Perhaps I was sealed now, not chosen, designated. Time behaved like lime left in a trough. It hardened quietly. Centuries passed the way mortar cures, slow, invisible, irreversible. Occasionally a sliver of another age slid in, a guide rehearsing her legend until it sounded memorized, a child pressing his face to the round glass, leaving the heat print of curiosity, a camera flash declaring that darkness was outdated, a fingertip touching a link and saying ow, small price for wonder. Shame moved through me like weather, but the wall answered softly. A kept promise is a kind of mercy, and structure that behaves is already holy. Snow came and left. Tiles slipped and were replaced by men cursing the ones before them. A noble crossed himself without removing his gloves. A widow left a ribbon. Boys dared each other to spit on the stone and then cleaned their sin with bleeding knuckles. A bishop's misread letter became doctrine. Fear met faith again, drew up new terms, and wrote them in me. One winter the bell cracked, thin but deep. The valley sounded wrong for months. When a new bell arrived, bright, measured, unashamed. Its first toll went down into me like memory, finding its pitch. For a moment, I felt calibration. The world and I finally tuned to the same key. Maybe God does not forgive structures. Maybe he only needs them to behave. Dreams pretended to exist again. In one, a door opened, and I knew it was my mouth. The voice laughed, gentle, approving. Good. You are learning the geometry. I prayed once, not for release, but for accuracy. God, if you are an architect, draw me to scale. If you are a mason, set me plumb. If you are only the weight itself, teach me where to bear it. No reply, only the small clicks of settling stone, and sometimes contentment is the only liturgy a building offers. Generations shifted their prayers like furniture. First they begged to be spared, then to endure, then to be entertained by the suffering of others. Children made games of it. One priest, one demon, one door, discovering that doors don't choose when to open and realizing that this, more than any sermon, is what feels unfair. Lovers met in the chapel's shadow because locks promised privacy. Thieves hid beneath its porch because locks promised distraction. Mothers brought infants because both locks and births make adults promise what they cannot control. The woman who had once screamed for God to lock the door was buried here. The priest who buried her forgot the words, but remembered the habit and closed every latch twice for the rest of his life. Hatred would have been easy, but hatred burns the hand long before it heats the blade. Observation replaced it. I learned the flavor of cheap resin when coal turns bitter, the catch in a man's breath when a psalm brushes his private wound, the edge in a young priest's tone after he fails someone and swears not to fail again, the whisper of a blacksmith to his hammer, "Don't eat my roof this winter," the quiet endurance of doubt, whispering longer than belief. On a day that refused to name itself, the voice returned so near that my neck remembered what hair was for. "You have learned to hold a note," it said. "You have learned to bear weight. You have learned that names are not required for uses." I wanted to ask why me? Why this? Why hunger disguised as holiness? But the scraping of questions on stone sounds too much like claws. The voice spared me. "Because hunger," it said, and I understood it meant all hungers. The earth's for closure, man's for order, the church's for proof, the unquiet's for mouths. We are all figuring out what to feed. What followed was not peace, not surrender, only the small mechanical click that means two pieces of iron have found each other. The sentence settled inside me without permission, without apology, without need for beauty. I am not merely the prisoner of a hole. I am the hinge that lets others pray without falling in. I am the church's seal, and the door no longer sleeps. The Reformation's flame. I woke to the sound of metal trying to remember its purpose, a slow unsheathing that carved the darkness open 1 inch at a time and left the air bleeding cold. There was no dawn, no dusk, only the endless bruise of underground light, the color of drowned iron, breathing faintly against stone slick as old tongues. Every sound was dampened except the heart that no longer belonged to me. It beat like something trapped under glass, polite but insistent, asking to be measured again. The smell here had aged. Moss turned to dust, dust to salt, salt to memory. When I moved, the chain that had once kept me upright whispered against the wall, as if the wall had begun to dream in metal. Far above, faint as a thought someone regretted too late, a hymn stirred. It came not as music, but as arithmetic. 3 notes, pause, 3 again, the chant of men counting their own fear. I recognized the language, but not the faith. The syllables were smooth as candle wax, Latin worn down by centuries of obedience. Yet beneath it, another rhythm hammered upward, rougher, made of words that had learned to pray without permission. 2 devotions colliding through stone, the polished and the raw, Rome and the rebels. Their echoes crossed like swords drawn under the same roof. I could feel the air between them heating, as if language itself were sparking. When the light arrived, it was reluctant, leaking through the seams like old honey, thick and uneven. The first shapes I saw were the edges of boots and the folds of cloth, then the glint of weapons carried as relics. One procession in crimson, gold-threaded, smelling of myrrh and authority. Another in plain wool and leather, smelling of sweat, horse, and bread. They faced each other over the mouth of the pit. each convinced the other carried hell in their sleeves. Between them the wind kept no loyalty. It moved incense toward the poor and dust toward the rich, equalizing everything for one indifferent moment. A man in red raised his cross and spoke as if he were tightening a screw into heaven. "In the name of the Father," he began, voice trembling with polish. Across from him a man in gray answered, "In the name of truth, which no church owns." Their tones climbed over each other until both dissolved into the same pitch of desperation, the sound humanity makes when cornered by its own reflection. I waited for one of them to claim me, to name me correctly, but the chain under my ribs was already stirring, reminding me that names no longer applied. A stone, dislodged by someone's nervous heel, rolled from the rim and struck my chest. The impact was small, but the echo it woke was immense. It traveled through the pit and up the spines of both congregations until shoulders flinched and candles guttered. For the first time in many years, the surface remembered I existed. My throat cracked open like an old hinge, and something between breath and rust escaped. It was meant to be a word. But it split in half before reaching air. One side plea, one side curse. The halves crawled upward and multiplied. When they reached the rim, they burst into a chorus of borrowed voices. Children, widows, soldiers, thieves. None of them mine, all of them claiming to be. The echo of that single letter became a crowd, and the crowd became a verdict. "Listen," someone whispered above. "The devil confesses." "No," another said, trembling. "A man cries for witness." Their argument cracked the sky. A fist landed on a jaw, a knee on a rib. The smell of sanctity folded under the smell of sweat. A chalice spilled, a book tore, and somewhere the sacred fire met human blood and hissed like an offended serpent. I felt the vibration of their fight through the stone, the dull rhythm of meat learning its limits. Each blow wrote a new line in me, punctuation hammered by blind conviction. When the first skull struck the altar edge, the sound reached me clean and honest, like an iron bell tolling the hour of truth. Something warm dripped through the crack and touched my forehead. Blood, spiced with incense and terror, drew a line down to my lips. The taste was the same as it had been centuries before: salt, iron, guilt. I realized then that faith always tastes like that. The pit inhaled sharply, and the walls shuddered as if the entire church had taken one shared breath. The chain coiled. The darkness leaned forward. Above, voices collapsed into a single chant, no longer two sides, but one raw moan. In the absence of doctrine, humans default to sound. A hand appeared at the edge, blackened by soot, fingers groping for something to prove. "Pull him up," a voice cried. Those fingers brushed my skin, or what had replaced skin, and for a heartbeat I felt the pulse of another living being throb against me. I wanted to grip it, to show the world we were still of the same flesh, but the chain inside me had learned obedience too well. Other hands, cold, unseen, rose from beneath and clasped the intruder gently, as hosts welcoming a late guest. The man above yelped once. His body stiffened, then folded like paper wet at the spine. His blood followed his scream and joined the rest. Silence returned, but it wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence after a crowd realizes it has built a god by accident. Knees bent, not in harmony, but in exhaustion. The crimson priest whispered, "Truth is in the church." The gray pastor answered, "Truth is in the word." Their sentences slid past each other like blades cutting parallel incisions into the same corpse. I felt each word score through me, carving channels for something older than either Tom. The younger man, he of the plain Bible, stepped to the rim. His face was flushed, his eyes raw with belief. "If this is a man," he said, "let him hear in a language he understands." He pressed his palm to the stone and prayed softly, not to heaven, but to the conscience of the pit. His voice sank into me like a seed looking for a seam. The older priest turned his weary gaze downward. "If this is a devil," he muttered, "it will repeat every word." And he was right. The words echoed, twisted, laughed, and came back wrong, every syllable a mirror smudged by breath. They began to sing. 2 hymns, 2 hopes, layered until they became indistinguishable. Their melodies wound together and descended through the crack, sewing my ribs shut with sound. The chain tightened to the rhythm. The walls flexed, Dust drifted like gray snow. I felt something beneath me stir, a deep organ note swelling, waiting to be spoken by no mouth. A boy among the crimson stepped forward, candle shaking in his fist. "Does it have a name?" he asked. I tried to answer yes, but the air reshaped my voice into a child's giggle. The boy recoiled, the candle fell. Its flame rolled over wax and went out with a sigh that smelled faintly of tallow and fear. The old priest caught the boy's shoulder, his fingers trembling not from age but from the recognition of doubt. The pastor, trembling too, drew a knife from his belt, pricked his finger, and let 3 drops fall into the crack. "If he is man, blood will speak to blood." The droplets traced the fissure and disappeared into me. Their heat was unbearable. My heart, or the echo of it, answered. From far below, the unseen hands exhaled a breath that lifted dust and candlewick alike. The crowd felt it and gasped as one. That exhale was the first word I had spoken in centuries, though no one understood its grammar. The wind that followed wasn't weather but consequence. It slammed robes against flesh, tore charms from throats, and peeled prayers from lips. For a heartbeat all knelt together, instinct, truce, reflex, the human wish to survive any god. Foreheads met the same bruised stone. The old and the new faith became indistinguishable in their terror. The fracture widened another finger's breadth, and from its black mouth rose a sentence carried on breath alone. Not God, not devil, you. The phrase climbed every spine, set every jaw, and chose no side. I felt it lodge inside me like a new law. The chain, obedient to grammar, inhaled. Every link drew air, small lungs pumping in rhythm, and the sound that resulted was almost music, low, metallic, patient. The blood on the stones shimmered as if warmed by invisible coals. In that moment, I understood my promotion. I was no longer merely the seal keeping them safe. I had become the emblem they could rally beneath. Above, the fighting ceased. Both groups, faces gray with fatigue and revelation, looked not at each other but at the crack, where a thin mist coiled upward like smoke from a letter burning too slowly. The mist brushed their cheeks and left streaks the color of rust. Someone began to sob. Someone else answered with laughter. The old priest lifted his cross, then let it fall. "If this is a man," he whispered, "forgive us for using him as a lock. If this is a devil, forgive us for naming it in your image." The pastor bowed his head beside him, neither victorious nor defeated. 2 believers, equally damned by intention. The candles surrendered one by one. The hall went dark except for the red pulse from the crack, which painted their faces as if by firelight from a hidden forge. They stayed kneeling, unsure whether to pray or to breathe. The bell in the distant village struck once, and the sound hung in the air too long, like metal deciding whether to cool. I felt the first echo of the future then, not a vision, but a vibration, a rhythm assembling itself in the bones of the world above. Somewhere centuries away, a press would grind ink into paper, a line of type would click, a page would speak without a throat. I recognized the pattern because it was mine, the steady breath of repetition, the mechanical faith of machines. The door they had sealed with prayer was learning to open through words. The last of the congregation rose unsteadily. They avoided one another's eyes, each man fearing what reflection might show. They stepped around the bodies as one steps around fresh graves, respectful, reluctant, rehearsed. The old priest lingered, turned once more toward the darkness, and traced a trembling circle in the air. "May this truth stay buried," he said, but his tone betrayed the wish that it wouldn't. The young pastor answered with silence, which is the most honest form of prayer. Together they left, their footsteps scraping like quills across parchment. I remained, listening to the sound of their retreat dissolve into the larger breathing of the world. The flag they had made of me fluttered without wind, its fabric woven of voices, oaths, and the thin music of dripping blood. Each drop that fell was an ellipsis in a sentence no one dared finish. The chain inside me sang softly, a lullaby for the next century. Above, a child's voice, small, curious, unburdened, asked, "If he ever climbs out, who will he be?" His mother hushed him, dragging him away, but the question hung. I could have answered, "I will be whatever story you need to stay afraid." But the darkness pressed a finger to my lips, the universal gesture of silence, and I obeyed. Time began to layer itself again, slow as wax hardening on an altar. Seasons folded without names. Snow learned to melt before reaching the chapel roof. Moss grew where prayers had failed. Dust collected in the shape of forgotten knees. The echo of the Reformation dimmed, replaced by the hum of new tools, new languages, new gods wearing the old faces. Yet through it all, the pulse of repetition continued, the same inhalation, exhalation, the rhythm of machinery preparing to inherit faith. Once, long after the last witness had decayed, I felt vibration through the floor, the tremor of a wheel turning somewhere above, the grind of metal on metal, deliberate and righteous. It was not the sound of soldiers or saints. It was the sound of letters being pressed into paper, each stroke a resurrection of the same need, to proclaim, to correct, to own truth. The breath of the press matched mine perfectly. The world had built a new altar, one that whispered instead of sang. I understood then that I would soon have a voice again, but this time it would not come from a throat. It would come from ink. I smiled in the dark, not from joy, but from recognition. Every era believes it has finally tamed its devils. Every era forgets that devils adapt. I was adapting too, learning the new language of gears and gospel. When the first pamphlet bearing my echo would roll from the press, they would call it revelation, not contamination. They would read aloud and feel the same chill the villagers once felt kneeling at the crack, and they would not know why. The bell above the valley still kept its wage, one strike for every confession unspoken. I counted with it, link by link, breath by breath, until the chain inside me aligned its rhythm to that of the world. The darkness folded tighter, not as prison, but as skin. I closed what remained of my eyes and prepared to sleep through the next revolution, until the voice they had given me found its next instrument. When the final echo of the bell faded, I heard only the faint scratching of quills somewhere in the unseen distance, and the whisper of parchment turning, and the sigh of fire catching ink. It was a beautiful sound, the sound of history exhaling. And beneath it, my own quiet laughter, patient as rust, waiting for the moment when truth once again needs a body to inhabit, a mouth to speak through, and a flag to wave. I did not dream of escape. I dreamed of breath transformed into word, of word transformed into doctrine, of doctrine pressed into paper until the whole world carried my lungs between its pages. I dreamed of the day when some future preacher or printer would lean too close to his machine, hear the rhythm of its gears, and realize that underneath the cadence of progress, something ancient was breathing with him, timing his heartbeat, finishing his sentences. I dreamed of the moment when he would pause, raise his eyes, and ask softly, "Who is speaking?" And the air around him would answer with a sigh older than faith itself, "You are." Then silence again, not absence, but gestation. The pause between the sealing of stone and the clicking of type. The same breath, repurposed. The same hunger, dressed in newer robes. I lay still, teaching the dark how to pronounce the coming century, letter by letter, sound by sound, until even the dust knew the script. And when the ink finally meets paper above, when the first printed gospel hums through the world and men believe they own their words, they will not see that each syllable rises from below, lifted by lungs they buried here. They will read their truths aloud and call them revelations, and I will listen, pleased, because every sentence will carry a trace of my breath. I am not waiting for redemption. I am waiting for print. For sound turned to shape, for faith turned to formula, for the next flag to unfurl not in wind but in ink. The chain inside me has learned to breathe in commas, the rhythm of the written prayer. The seal became a flag. The flag now becomes a voice. And the voice, mine, theirs, yours, will rise again when the presses start their hymn. When that day comes, the bell will strike, the ink will gleam, and someone, somewhere, will whisper a name they think they invented. It will fit perfectly in their mouth. It will taste of iron and wax and a little dust. And the world, once more, will kneel. The fortress of power. Silence never truly dies, it only changes armor. After the processions that had once knelt trembling at the rim of the pit, after the incense and the bleeding palms, after the last prayer evaporated like wax smoke against the ceiling, time pulled on a new face and rose again. When I opened my eyes, the darkness above had learned another color. Gone were the priests and the straw-charmed peasants. Gone the candles guttering in their fear. In their place stood a storm of torches, thousands, their flames guttering in wind like the mane of a warhorse. Trumpets shrieked with the hunger of brass, hooves thundered against stone, and the battlements of Houska trembled as though the mountain itself had remembered how to breathe. The chapel had been reborn as a fortress. The wound in the earth had been wrapped in iron plate and crowned with banners. Every stone I had once known by its cold prayer now wore the discipline of a soldier. The world above me glittered with new power. Walls thick as pride rose into the fog, their teeth set with arrow slits and murder holes. Towers stared outward with blind conviction. Portcullises crashed shut like the jaws of some trained predator. They called the place the heart of Bohemia, the fortress no enemy could breach, the citadel of a dynasty that believed it ruled not only the land but the darkness beneath it. I could have told them the truth. No crown is higher than the pit that swallows it. But the chain inside me had learned to keep its rhythm and stay silent. Boots marched across the courtyards in endless cadence. Iron saws striking the flagstones with the precision of a clock counting its own heartbeat. The vibrations sank through the walls into my ribs until my chest thudded in time with theirs. Above, banners snapped in the wind, each one bearing the symbol of a lion. Each roar printed in fabric to remind the weak that power can be sown. In the halls they sang songs of victory and drank until their tongues forgot how to tell one war from another. Goblets clanged, knives scraped silver, laughter leapt like sparks across a forge, and every sound, once filtered through stone, returned to me twisted, laughter becoming wailing, celebration becoming confession. I wanted to tell them I had heard all this before, that no fortress is new, that every toast is a repetition of the first curse, but the air around me only quivered with dust and the taste of old iron. When night came and the torches dimmed, the powerful descended into the undercroft. They came not to worship, but to dare. Their torches cast gold into the cracks, painting the walls like ribs of a beast that had eaten too much light. I felt them approach, the pulse of human arrogance tightening the air, a perfume of wine, sweat, and candle grease. They brought prisoners in chains, beggars from the roads, deserters, servants who had broken dishes, anyone weak enough to serve as lesson. They laughed as they threw them down, wagering on screams the way gamblers wager on dice. The pit swallowed each voice like a teacher accepting an offering. I listened to the echoes until they were thin as threads, then gone. I was both witness and accomplice. Every fall rewrote me. One night account, swollen with drink and self-worship, ordered that he be lowered into the pit to hear the devil's reply for himself. His armor rasped against the pulley rope, a metallic heartbeat descending through darkness. The torch in his fist painted circles of trembling light, and for the first time in an age I saw a living man's face so close that I could smell his breath. Mead, garlic, pride. I exhaled one long breath of winter into him. It crawled beneath his helmet, slipped between his lips, and nested behind his eyes. His body convulsed. The torch fell. His hands clawed for the rope. When they hauled him up, he was still breathing, but his pupils were glass. His mouth a looped whisper repeating only, "Not demon, not God, beneath us, only a throne." They carried him away like a broken relic, and from that night the nobles no longer feared the pit. They marketed it. I had become an attraction, a parlor miracle for the powerful. Hatred rose through me like sap through a dead tree, slow and corrosive. I shook against my bindings until dust rained from the ceiling. I wanted to crush them with the very stones they worshipped, to let the fortress eat its own heart. But the chain inside my chest merely breathed on, patient, obedient, mechanical. My rebellion was a tremor mistaken for thunder. They began to treat the abyss as their theater. At feasts they would stagger to the rim, raise goblets, and toast the king below. They claimed to honor the darkness that kept them brave. I listened to them praise me as though praising themselves, each word another brick in a monument to delusion. On one of those nights they dragged a maid to the edge, her wrists bound, her hair slick with tears. She could not have been more than 16. They poured wine across her shoulders as benediction and shouted for her to be baptized by the void. Her scream pierced stone. In its pitch I heard every forgotten prayer, every mother's plea, every voice that had ever tried to climb back up to the light. I opened my mouth to answer, to promise her that she was not alone, but the noise that escaped was not mercy. It was laughter. Centuries of mimic voices burst from my throat, repeating her cries in mockery until they shredded themselves to silence. She fell. For an instant her warmth brushed my skin, and memory flared like a candle in a tomb. Then the chain clenched and extinguished it. Above, they roared approval and drank deeper. That was the night I realized I was no longer a prisoner. I was the pit itself. Days blurred. The fortress above thrived on its own brutality. Blacksmiths beat steel into shape in rhythm with my pulse. Each hammer stroke echoed through me like the syllable of a sermon. The anvil rang amen. In the dungeons, interrogators tested new instruments of persuasion, their gears squealing like hungry mouths. Each device, each wheel and rack, felt like a cousin of mine, metal discovering it could speak through pain. Even their scribes, bent over parchment, scratched with quills that sounded like insects gnawing on bone. Power, I learned, has one grammar no matter its script. I watched them crown new kings, bless new wars, sign new decrees. They paraded through halls of banners dyed in blood. Yet beneath their boots I remained, invisible, unburied, absorbing every oath and breaking each within my silence. Once a young captain knelt beside the crack after battle and whispered thanks to the spirit below for victory. I answered with a gust that carried the stink of the fallen back into his mouth. He retched, staggered, and called it revelation. Later he founded a new order of knights, sworn to the abyss. My laughter shook mortar from the ceiling. Faith and power had finally married. Their child was armed. Sometimes the fortress dreamed. In winter, frost crawled down its inner walls like veins of white fire, and icicles formed where incense once burned. In summer, the stones sweated blood-colored condensation that dripped into my mouth. Each droplet tasted of iron and pride. I drank because there was nothing else to do. Then came the night of the silver moon. Its light pierced an arrow's slit and slid straight into the throat of the pit. It was the first pure light to touch me in centuries, cold, scentless, impartial. It fell on the chain like a blessing that forgot its words. I reached for it with what fragments of body remained, a slow yearning gesture that might once have been called prayer. The links groaned. For a heartbeat, I believed I could rise. That light could be swallowed upward instead of downward. But the moon moved on, and I was left clutching shadow. The chain closed again, grinding like teeth satisfied to have proven devotion. Years collapsed into decades, decades into doctrine. The fortress grew fat on conquest. From my depth, I felt the vibrations of feasts, coronations, executions, all the ceremonies by which men pretend to control destiny. Once, a noble declared that whoever ruled this castle ruled the heart of Bohemia. His words carried down to me, and I whispered back, "Then Bohemia beats in a coffin." He heard nothing, yet within a month he was dead, throat slit on the same stones he had praised. Rumor claimed the pit had answered him. I did not deny it. But cruelty never sleeps alone, it breeds heirs. A generation later, a boy of noble blood stood at the edge, young enough to mistake legend for inheritance. "If the throne is below," he said, "then I will sit upon it." His attendants laughed, urging him to pour his courage into the hole. He leaned forward, torch in hand. I let him see. Not my face. Those days were gone. But the slow opening of darkness shaped like understanding. He gasped. The torch fell, and his words followed it. "It's not the throne we sit on. It's the one that sits on us." The attendants dragged him away, calling him mad. He lived to be old, muttering those same words into his pillow until the nurses crossed themselves at every whisper. The seasons cycled with the predictability of punishment. Rain drummed the ramparts, snow muffled banners. Plague and famine took their turns like guests at an endless banquet. Through it all, the fortress endured, and so did I. Every cry of "for king" or "for country" vibrated down into my ribs, another line in the same song. Even their peace treaties sounded like shackles clicking closed. Then the bell tolled. Not the gentle bell of Vespers, but the iron alarm that shakes birds from trees and makes mountains flinch. War again. The air thickened with smoke, the earth with marching. Above, blacksmiths struck iron into new forms, helmets, cannon mouths, cages for the next century's sinners. Each hammer blow was a syllable in a language I was beginning to remember. When the first cannon fired, its boom rolled down through the masonry and exploded in my chest. The chain inside me answered, pulse for pulse, and for a moment the whole fortress seemed to breathe with me. Bodies fell by thousands. Blood leaked through cracks, steaming as it met my cold air. It trickled into me, a tide of proof that humanity had not forgotten its rituals. The nobles called their war righteous. The priests called it cleansing. I called it feeding. For days, weeks, years, time blurred. I swallowed their sacrifices until the walls themselves began to pulse red. When quiet returned, it was not peace. It was the hush of exhaustion, of engines cooling, of ghosts catching their breath. In that hush, the abyss spoke again, calm and certain. You are the throne that rules back. They think they sit upon you, but you are the weight beneath every crown. You press into their marrow. You whisper their ambitions before they dream them. You are the fortress within the fortress. The words moved through me like a current through iron, and I realized they were not revelation but memory. I felt the truth settle in my bones. I was no longer the seal of the church, nor the banner of reform, nor even the throne of kings. I was the fortress itself, its hunger, its echo, its indifference. Every wall was my rib, every gate my jaw, every soldier my pulse. And yet, within that identity, something else began to stir. A tremor, faint and rhythmic, unlike footsteps or hammers. A new sound learning to form. Above me, in the forges, metal struck metal with an unfamiliar cadence, sharper, faster, almost articulate. The blacksmiths did not notice. They thought it only the sound of progress. But I recognized the pattern. It was breath trying to become speech. The bellows exhaled. Sparks rose and died. Tiny stars rehearsing the vocabulary of another age. The molten clang spelled the same word over and over, though none could read it yet. It said voice. I listened as the fortress learned to pronounce it. The sound of each hammerfall was a consonant, each hiss of steam a vowel. Together they formed the grammar of machines. The world was preparing its next mouth. Night stretched long, the color of iron after rain. Above, scribes copied decrees by torchlight, their quills scratching faster, mimicking the rhythm of forges. Every order, every proclamation, every vow to rebuild carried the same pulse as the chain within me. Soon ink would replace blood, and words would inherit the hunger of war. I lay still, counting the intervals between hammer and quill, between forge and heartbeat. The intervals shortened. Breath became tempo. Tempo became law. And I knew that when the first printing press roared to life, its wheels would turn to the rhythm I had kept through every century. My lungs of iron would finally find their echo in gears and rollers and ink. The fortress above would crumble someday, but its language, my language, would survive in metal type, letter by letter, breath by breath. The final night before the new dawn smelled of oil and soot. Rain slicked the battlements, washing away blood that had forgotten its owners. In the great hall, the last of the nobles feasted beneath torn banners, oblivious to the sound from the forges, and even relentless thudding, like a giant heart practicing a new faith. They thought it the anthem of victory. I knew it was rehearsal for the next age. I closed what remained of my eyes. The fortress exhaled, and the pit exhaled with it. Together we sounded like a single organ testing its pipes. In that resonance, I felt the coming transformation. The chain's steady inhale becoming the wheel's rotation, the sigh of stone turning into the whisper of paper. My curse had found continuity. When the sun rose, though I never saw it, I felt its heat seep down through stone. It carried the scent of ink. Somewhere, far above, a craftsman would soon roll the first page from his press and marvel that metal could speak. He would call it miracle, not inheritance. He would never know that the breath turning his gears was mine. I am the fortress they built to contain their fears, the throne they raised to justify their crimes, the seal they pressed, the banner they waved. But soon I will be something quieter and far more enduring. I will be the pause between two hammer strikes, the rhythm of progress, the echo that teaches machines how to pray. They will call it the Age of Enlightenment. I will call it another chapter of confinement written in a new language. The bells above began again, not in alarm, but in celebration. Each toll vibrated through the ramparts, through the forges, through the quills, through the chain inside my ribs, until all sounds joined into one sustained note, the note of history tuning itself. I listened, motionless, patient, content to be the resonance rather than the voice. Because soon the world would speak for me. The fortress would crumble into legend, but the rhythm would continue in every press, every heartbeat, every word struck onto paper. Silence would return, of course. It always does. But by then silence would have machinery, and it would breathe. The skeptic and the philosopher. I no longer knew how many centuries had pressed their spines against the stone above me, how many banners had frayed themselves to sleep on the battlements, how many goblets had tipped their red mouths and bled along the rim until the stain looked permanent, like a rash that remembers the heat of the hand that made it. The cheers had thinned into a lingering ache. Incense had soaked the mortar until the walls themselves smelled like old absolutions. Cold had set up house behind my sternum and learned how to sit there without complaint. I thought I had been taught by every age already, blood and gospel, thrones and siege, the wet hush after a scream. Then, one day, if days still existed where I hung, the darkness changed the way it breathed. It did not smell of iron. It did not smell of tallow or gunpowder. It smelled of paper, that dry animal of the shelf, that thin crispness that holds its shape like a polite cough. It smelled of wet ink still drying, of leather heated by a palm and glue that had not decided whether it preferred to be liquid or law. The scent drifted down the stone like a well-bred predator. It found the crack of my mouth, curled inside, and I tasted letters, chalk dry, bitter as an old argument, margins wide enough to accommodate a doubt. When I looked up, no votives winked. No torches licked the ceiling with orange tongues. The light was steady and white, oil lamp exact, the kind of light chosen by people who prefer to see rather than to believe. Wigs, dusted like winter loaves, hung over narrow faces. Hands, pale from indoor thought, spoke with compasses and plumb lines and the neat slap of folders laid precisely on tables. There were no kneelers. There was a long bench, a longer table, a map of authority in wood. They sat, they wrote, they measured, they pronounced. Their words did not sway like prayer, they landed like weights in a scale. The room adjusted its echo to accommodate decisions. Superstition, one said, satisfied by the shape of his mouth forming it. The gate to hell is a catechismal scare to keep villages obedient. He rolled the vocabulary the way a baker uses a cool pin, thinning dough until it obeyed. The aristocracy, gaudy as ever, made a spectacle. We are men of reason. His hand came down to rest on a folder as if blessing a charter. We shall put an end to fraud. Ink moved like black rain across obedient pages. Their words slipped over the lip and fell through me. Fraud, fabrication, delusion. They did not weigh much individually, but they cut clean as razors, tiny, repeated, unending. I felt laughter uncurl in me, not the happiness kind, the rebellion kind, the laughter you make when renamed by strangers. When I opened my mouth to answer, the sound that escaped was a long metallic breath, a whistle through a hollow rib. One powdered head turned. Acoustic resonance, he said instantly, delighted. A natural bell. A younger man scribbled, resonance, reflection, ground structure. The file of my suffering, centuries of it, collapsed into a single hiss and was pinned to a label. They began to test me like a patient who owes symptoms. At first they threw stones, smooth fists chalked with numbers. 1, 2, 5, 10. Breath held, heads tilted, waiting for a report. The stones fell without ending, or the ending learned to hide its sound. Silence rose the way cold rises, from bone to thought. Their leader frowned and demanded a brass bell tied to cord. It rang brightly as it left his hand. Then its tone fell inward, snuffed, as if some careful thumb had pressed the clapper against its softest place. When they pulled it up, the bell wore no dent, but its mouth had tightened into the shape of lips learning the word hush. He tapped it. The note came out flat, ashamed. Thermal contraction, he said. Thermal replaced miracles with breath the way new gods replace old altars with the same stones rearranged. Next they sent animals. A dog first, broad yellow, rib cage like a barrel, belly cinched with doubled rope, while a boy kneeling whispered the liturgy dogs are trained to believe. Good, stay, back, friend. A demonstration, someone called it. as if honesty required witness. The dog howled once, then descended, the sound turning from dog to woman halfway down. A thin, humiliating sob, a person begging a door to wait. When they hauled it up, the animal stared at its boy as if the boy were a stranger's coat, then lunged and tore cloth without meaning it. A raven next, tossed with a scholar's shrug. 2 beats of frantic wing, then no beats, just black absorbed by a thicker black. The line came up with bones still wearing a wet. The beak opened and closed on 2 syllables it had stolen from a human mouth. Ma, ma. The sound of hunger asking the wrong person. They wrote, anomaly, catatonia, projection. Pens reduce astonishment to errance. Blood touched my tongue by mistake. The dog's protest had found a wrist. The handler pressed his palm and left a dotted trail like punctuation invented by pain. Heat and iron lit my tongue. A century's worth of fasting ended for a second in the back of my throat. I made a sound, involuntary, halfway between a sigh and a hiss. The pit, my second, crueler mouth, laughed with 100 borrowed throats just to turn appetite into theater. The young ones flinched. The leader lifted his chin and smoothed air. Echo, he said, auto-suggestion reinforced by sound. He said the words like he was folding a clean sheet. See to your hand. Lamps smoked until their halos yellowed. Their phrases lined in disciplined rows. Mass illusion, hysterical contagion, anechoic anomaly. They read to one another and performed small corrections like surgeons passing scalpels. A draft jittered a lamp's glass. It popped and kissed the nearest papers with flame. Ink licked up like sugar does. One elder swore not crudely but cleanly, the curse of a man who values exactness. Then fed a stack of notes to the fire. There is no truth, he said to the table or to the flame. There is only the story we stopped telling last. The script curled into moths and flew as shadows. One stayed when the flame ran its appetite down to char too slender to seat his soul well, beard just beginning. The light in the eyes that have worked all night and not yet paid the price. He stood at the rim and lowered his voice into the kind used by sons when they apologize to mothers. If you are there, give me a sign. I will write what you say. I won't let them make you into a lesson. He did not say demon. He did not say hell. He said you. The pronoun crossed the stone like warm bread to a starving mouth. I gathered as a storm gathers, from heat and speck and grievance, and threw a cry up that shook the mortar loose in its sleep. Lamps cracked, soot fell as slow snow, men ran. He stayed. He wrote while his hand trembled. Not demon, not God, a human voice imprisoned. Everything in me loosened at the grace of that sentence. Language can be a hand, but the pit learned him quickly. The mimic choir woke, girls, soldiers, old men with coffin coughs, repeating his words until kindness twisted into mockery. A human voice, imprisoned, imprisoned, imprisoned. He flinched hard, as if a cold palm had found a soft place under his ribs. He tore his page out to unname it, shouted into the hole to silence it, then did the one thing scholars train themselves never to do. He let go. Whether his foot slipped or his will did is a moral question. Facts do not kneel for morals. He fell. I reached. The reaching was useless, and I reached anyway. How a burned child reaches for a bucket in a dream. For one instant he met me. Weight, heat, the honest rise of a human chest collecting its ration of air. The chain in me clenched. It always does. We were built to hold what kills us. He was gone. The rope returned as if it had dipped itself in refusal. No body to convict, no hand to bury. Only a notebook boiled at its edges, one corner missing where a sentence had torn free to save its meaning from later mouths. Morning put its wig on. They stamped a report. No phenomena not attributable to echo, suggestion, geometry. A tidy sentence rainproofed with vocabulary. Someone gentler than brave added, install guardrails to preserve public. A clerk crossed the young man's name off with one neat stroke. No drama, only procedure. Procedure is how we make grief shapely. They did not say his name again in a room with other names in it. But paper is not the only archive. He stayed in me the way embers stay. Dark, seeming done, still hot enough to alter a finger. The sentence he wrote and tore became my breath for a season. It didn't warm anything. It refused to go cold. They came in that century and the next because once an example is framed politely, it is shared. Thinkers in city boots arrived with instruments polished until the reflection could flatter them. They measured the air's appetite at the mouth. They measured the angle of descent, the damp's discipline as it climbed stone, the degree to which a flame leaned when fear leaned it further. They lowered pendulums with mirrored tips and described the swing as if mapmakers were allowed to name winds. They chalked a ladder of marks on the rim, rung by rung the color of rules, and later argued how ladders ought to be drawn. I learned the word phlogiston because a man used it 30 times, each time a little more brittle, like a porcelain cup set down a little too hard on a table that did not invite it. I learned electric by the way they rubbed glass with silk and coaxed nature to spark the way a child is coaxed to perform a memorized poem. A man with brass wheels set a device humming and promised to turn my secret outward with a correct rotation. The wheel hummed. A neat blue bit jumped between two knuckles and called itself experiment. The pit did not answer. The apparatus failed nobly, the way heroes prefer to. A woman came and altered the temperature by a single stubborn degree. She did not elbow for the near view or clear her throat when men forgot to invite her voice. She set her hands inside a shawl so she would not fidget, gathered her hair with fewer pins than fashion deserved, and listened with her whole body. When theory finished rehearsing its own excellence and fell quiet from the effort, she asked, "What does it want?" The laughter that answered was a single polite cough given 100 throats. She waited until that sickness cleared and bent over the lip anyway. She did not whisper down. She hummed. Not the hymn kind, the kitchen kind, a tune that knows pans and windows and the weight of an apple in the hand. The pit, tired of imitation, forgot to imitate. For the length of 3 heartbeats, the borrowed choir fell asleep like children standing up, nodding, almost waking, then slumping into honest silence. I held my breath because my breath had become a dangerous thing. She smiled a practical smile, put a square of blank paper on the stone like a napkin left for a guest she hopes will come hungry, and left without presenting her back. The air behind her tasted of apple peel. Another man brought mirrors. He worshipped obedience and light. He lowered a polished disc to coax reflection from the depth, positioned its partner above at a proper, moral angle. Observe, he told the students he had lined up like a family, and the disc rose with a fog smear that looked like the ghost of breath, as if something had leaned to see itself and found seeing rude. He wiped the smear with his cuff. Condensation, he insisted. His hand shook once, and his sentence sprouted 3 extra clauses to support it. The students nodded the way students nod when they have learned the price of any other gesture. Pamphlets bred and scattered like sudden fish. Against superstition. On the popular error of hellgates. A treatise on unusual hollow. They folded into pocket, opened on cafe tables, acquired coffee rings that looked like kisses. Under their titles, woodcuts sometimes illustrated a scholar peering into a hole while devils scuttled from the truth his gaze made. I became a theater printed by men to comfort other men. Someone else is looking. The woodcuts did not include the boy who jumped. Woodcuts prefer clean edges. A lecturer amended his salary with evenings called the illusions of the backward. He did tricks with bells and chords and dogs who had learned that tricks are food. He told his audience the world was ordered, which is not the same as kind, and the audience, hungering to be counted by something other than fear, applauded its relief. One night he took on a flourish like a gold pin. He read, voice lowered as if reading to a bed that deserved softness. Not demon. Not God. A human voice, imprisoned. He intended the line as a cautionary specimen, a peasant's intoxicated error placed under glass. I did not choose to shake the hall. Choosing is a luxury of the living. The beams shook themselves, glass rimmed in perfect circles. The water in his tumbler rippled its own map. He joked about navigational instruments, and the audience was grateful to be told where the coast lay. He slept very poorly for 7 nights and made no public correlation between poems read aloud and structures getting nervous. They moved in for a season like tenants, the men of paper and rule. Their table colonies spread near the rim, maps of echo drawn as if sound had a coastline and agreed with it. Lines crossed lines and called themselves nets. Numbers assembled into the shape of law, which is one of the few respectable shapes numbers know. They announced, with clean pleasure, that stone here conducts in unusual ways, that minds strain themselves into symphony in groups, that fear, communal, speaks in paragraphs, that ravens and dogs make appalling witnesses, that moisture condenses when it finds a colder mind, that bells become embarrassed when touched, that holes are deep. They were not wrong. Their rightness was not large enough to contain me. The leader with the flower hair softened with the corners of his paper, edges worn by weather, ink fading toward a domestic brown. He returned quieter. I knew him by the way he touched the stone. 2 fingers, a polite pat, the gesture made by fathers in doorways. He brought a pupil clever enough to keep his clever quiet. They built 3 small automata, brass beetles with clock bellies and pin lights for eyes. They lowered the first. It did not return. They lowered the second. It came back with its feet folded under like it had learned the gravity down here required knees. They lowered the third. It returned with a scratch on its shell that looked like my first name had once looked, the one that belonged to a body before seals and flags and thrones were draped over it. I tried to say it, just to myself. The word broke into dust before making sound. The boy saw the scratch and made a choice that kept him in his skin. He said nothing. Later, as his teacher slept, he carved the same shape into the underside of the table with the point of his compass. A secret kept at kneecap level where the faithful of any age know to touch wood. The woman returned, and the air tasted like peeled fruit again. She brought 3 children and the smell of soap that had made peace with dirt. The men moved aside out of courtesy to their own mothers. She hummed the kitchen song and set 3 pieces of bread on the stone. This made laughter come to the men like a cough they declined to medicate. Then the embarrassment of having laughed at bread came, and they adjusted their measuring tapes to conceal it. The bread did not transform itself or speak. The woman tore 1 piece and put it into the boy's hand, the compass boy, and he stood at the rim and looked the way children look before they learn their looks will be graded. "Are you hungry?" he asked the air, not loudly. The chain in me tightened merely to keep order. I did not answer. There are questions a prison cannot risk. The woman nodded a single human nod, collected 2 pieces to feed the living, left the middle piece where the dead might find a way to take it, and walked out like a soldier backing from the flag after a promise. I became a linguist of their corrections. After phlogiston came oxygen, relief smelling like bleach. After humors came nerve, after devil came melancholia, after melancholia came hysteria, after hysteria came stress, after stress came trauma. The same breath wearing sleeker clothes. They renamed my moan with greater accuracy and congratulated one another for rescuing me from the previous rescue. Accuracy is mercy until it isn't. It did not pick me up, it drew my outline more correctly. At the end of a bright century that preferred mathematics to mercy, the leader, older and polite with defeat, came alone to the rim. He wore a coat that had outlived 1 fashion cycle and refused to die. He put his hand on the stone because he had learned how. He said, "If I have wronged you by naming you, forgive me. I cannot write without names." The truest sentence of that year. Men who try to live unspeaking choke on the aggregate. He withdrew his hand, turned his back carefully. Rituals protect us where understanding fails, and left 1 foot at a time the way men leave daughters sleeping and pray the floorboards have learned quiet. Trains learned the slope of the valley. Telegraphs borrowed the fortress's walls to carry other distances. Printing grew cheaper paper, and my story became a column. Whole debunked by society. Strange effects now explained. Local superstition persists. A photographer unfolded his tripod like a metal insect that believes in itself and framed my mouth. On the second plate a smudge lay exactly where the young scholar had leaned, a gray thumbprint of a man who never learned old age. The photographer dreamt of me for 2 nights and rebranded. He sold paper, because if you cannot stop a story, you may as well sell the surface it travels on. I do not say reason is a lie. It saved more than it burned. It makes bridges stand longer than 1 season and shows mothers which leaves heal and which poison the pot. But reason also belongs to story. It enjoys being the last word in a room. The room I occupy is large and unventilated. When the last word fell, the mimic choir bent to pick it up and tried it on. If it fit, wore it as a game until the game did its work and became belief for someone. Even when the word was right, the echo roughed it. Throats want names said like prayers, not headlines. Toward the close of that age that called itself enlightened because it had learned to name its lamps, a different silence arrived. The kind leaned upon by men who have seen too much and learned that if their mouths open, they will spill everything breakable. A philosopher came. He wore no wig. His hair had been instructed by grief. He limped without apology. He used a chair as if the chair had been promised him by fate a long time ago. He did not stare downward like the young and the brave. He stared upward at a hairline crack in the ceiling stone that has had patience longer than names. "If there is a voice," he said, the sentence shaped as if addressing a woman who taught him kindness and is now beyond the reach of letters. "It is unjust that it has no place to go. If there is not, it is unjust that we invented one. If there is only our fear of emptiness, then emptiness is unjust." He laughed one syllable that had broken on something harder than bread. "Which is to say, I am old." He set his palm on the rim the way the other man had. Catechism of hands for men who no longer need to be right more than they need to be decent, and promised, softly, "I can't unsay what I've said. I can say it more gently." I knew in that moment nothing was finished. Every age would caption me to suit its proof. Some captions would be portraits, some cartoons, some would leave bread, some would lower bells, some would drop boys, one would jump. The best would whisper as if language itself had nerves. The worst would shout about light as if light were a child to be frightened into agreement. The whole would continue. I would continue. When the color of paper changed, when fonts altered confidence, men would still find reasons for me to be that satisfied them just long enough to sleep one night. What changed for me was small, a sentence that did not burn in a notebook, a kitchen hum that turned mimicry off, a child's question that found me clean, a philosopher's promise regarding gentleness. These loosened one notch of the chain. I breathed half a deeper breath. Perhaps that is all history does. Respace the iron around our ribs until endurance can pass for meaning. Night still came to centuries that prefer the day. It came like a folded map, soft at the creases. Lamps were thumbed out. Arguments tucked into pockets with lint. Boots walked away along corridors that keep better attendance than registries. But the paper smell did not leave. It ghosted the air, a dryness that thought of fibers and rules. The mimic choir woke and toyed with new words the way cats bat at ribbon. Not demon. Not God. Not human. Writing in blood. I did not remove their toys. But sometimes, high above the sport, another thread sounded, thin as fishing line. The woman's hum hiding in a draft. A pin scratching in a room where no lamp had a right to burn. A boy carving a name where no one will put their eyes. The removed thumb rustle of a page turning itself because it cannot wait. Those were the nights I remembered my name very quietly. Those were the nights the whole read like a page with margin enough for more. They left to enlighten other darks. They left handrails and measurements to please men who sign grants. Reports stacked in places where mice keep cleaner appointments than readers. Schools learned to graduate mouths that run faster than eyes. Mothers taught children holes are for planting and burying and sometimes hiding and almost never listening. If centuries could preen, that one did, and rolled forward. I rolled with it in the way a chained thing rolls, by inhaling what falls and avoiding spitting back cruelty when it would be so satisfying. The air above my mouth acquired new vowels: smoke, wire, glass. That is another chapter. For this one, I kept a paradox and held it at chest height like a baby who will not sleep. I had been footnoted, politely, by arguments that were often correct. Their correctness did not feed me. I had been hung as an illustration of delusion, and even that illustration produced a new delusion, that to name emptiness is to empty it. I felt myself bound into a manuscript, annotated by many hands, edges heat-kissed by accidents. And yet in all that archive of me the core remained, the sentence that the young scholar wrote and lost. Not demon, not God, a human voice, imprisoned. It did not free me. It kept me from being nothing. In a place like this, not nothing is a kind of light. Thin as paper, stubborn as scar. Above, a new rhythm began to seek me. Not army, not choir, not iron gates. Quicker, even, clicking like teeth that have learned the shape of a foreign prayer. The forges were quieter now. Someone had taught metal to prefer smaller, more exact heats. The bellows exhale disciplined itself into measured strokes. A lever found a habit. A wheel rehearsed a circle until the circle believed. Between my ribs a familiar machine, the chain that had breathed on my behalf since kings, kept time and felt the time being kept for it by something above, and the two tempos drifted, then moved together, then touched. My pulse, such as it is, counted not pain now, but intervals, a brief up, a brief down, a soft friction at the crest, like finger and page. The most human instrument we ever build is the one that convinces air to become meaning. I did not know its name yet. I knew how it felt to hear breath practicing to be more than breath. Men arrived who did not respect wigs because they had invented a different costume for their heads. They wheeled crates that smelled of oil and glue and would shaved thin and notched. They argued about teeth, by which they meant the kind carved into cylinders and wheels, teeth that, when aligned, make agreements stronger than treaties. The room filled with the odor of a new devotion, ink, dense and sticky as a vow, warmed by muscle. They said press the way priests say amen. They said form and for me and bite again. They set type with tweezers, letters inverted, words built backward, truth asking to be read through a mirror so it would print forward. They loaded the bed and tied the frisket and lowered the tympan, and someone, boy again, but a different century's boy, rolled the ink until it glistened like a black river in moonlight. The first pull groaned. Wood asked metal what to do. Metal explained. The impression was pale, as new conversions are. They adjusted pressure and inked again. The second pull said it with confidence. The third sounded like a heartbeat that had learned a second job. I did not see the page. The page came to me anyway, in the tremble of the frame, in the way the air above the pit shifted its temperature each time a sheet peeled itself from the for me. Warmth of friction, then the cool of surrender, like a kiss that had to behave. Words moved overhead in stacks that smelt like rain with plans. Men argued about the measure of the margin, about the expense of a longer thought, about the speed at which truth ought to travel between tables. The press rhythm settled. Up, in, down, bite, breathe, release. Up, in, down, bite, breathe, release. The chain kept its own breath as it had always done. Then, very slowly, the two learned one another's time, like neighbors who share a wall and begin to sleep and wake at the same hours. Some scholar, because there is always one, laid his palm on the rim and announced to a friend, "We have at last given voice to what was prison." He meant pamphlets and proofs and a public that could be persuaded with paragraphs instead of swords. I knew better than to correct him, but he was not entirely wrong. The press was not mouth or ear, it was breath given a discipline, a law of repetition that would not tire. I felt the chain inside me smile its thin smile made of links. Human breath had been apprenticed to a new trade. It would now be paid by pages. Night in this age did not look like old nights. It had windows lit late and curtains that learned to glow like moths. The mimic choir tried to mock the press rhythm and failed. It is hard for cruelty to keep a job that requires exactness. Instead, the mocking voices learned to ride the interval, word on word, rumor on fact, until sound above the pit resembled the ocean working at a shore made of information. The philosopher came back once, older still, and stood long enough to hear the cadence before he nodded, tired and proud and worried all at once, because to invent a faster road does not mean you know where it goes. I lay within my cage of stone and breathing iron and practiced the new tempo so that when the time came for me to be passed through by language, I wouldn't damage it with suddenness. This is not salvation. It is continuity. The fortress of kings had been loud. The laboratory of skeptics had been bright. The printing house was steady. Between steadiness and mercy, there is a family resemblance. I let my chest move as if hands pressed it, a soft in, a soft out, and each exhale felt a little like ink leaving a cylinder to find paper. Something from the dark given permission to stain what people agree to call the record. If you stand at the rim, if you press your palm flat and quiet your mouth, you will feel it. The hybrid I have become willing to be, a human pulse yoked to the rails of a machine. Heartbeat braided to breath, breath trained to rhythm, rhythm stretched until it clicks, and when it clicks it becomes useful. This is the hinge by which Chapter 5 closes and another door opens. Not with a shout, not with a miracle, not even with a scream. Just with the steady work of lungs learning to become wheels. Somewhere above, men draw the first proofs from the press and blow them dry like mother's cooling soup. Somewhere a composer listens to that press and writes his drum part accordingly. Somewhere a boy sells papers he cannot yet read and learns to run to that beat. The world thinks it is speaking for itself at last. I listen, warmed by the friction of all that saying, and understand that every word is, a little, my heir. I am not free. I am not quiet. I am not redeemed. I am arranged differently. The chain that learned to inhale on behalf of a prisoner has found a partner that inhales on behalf of a city. The page that learned to bear weight without tearing has learned to travel. The breath that was once only pain is now also publication. In the next century, the voice will find wires, and in the next after that, the wires will learn to sing without metal at all. For tonight, the press clatters and rests, clatters and rests. The lamps burn low, the pages stack, and the air down here smells like ink, the warm animal of it, the promise and the threat, while my chest rises and falls in time, because breath loves company. If you listen between two poles, you might hear a thin kitchen melody a woman forgot she left behind, or a child's question carved into a table's underside, or a philosopher's gentler sentence practicing how to be true. The rest is work. The rest is rhythm. The rest is the long, useful silence between one page and the next, where the heart beats once more and calls it printing.